Hello everyone. Today we are very honored to have Mr. Raja Mohan, distinguished professor of Jindal Global University of Delhi and also a very distinguished columnist. Thank you very much for coming here and receiving our interview. Let me start by asking your assessment of the current status of global affairs. The post-war international order based on such principles as the rule of law or multilateralism has been going through a profound transformation, or the challenges to say the least. Looking at the war in Ukraine or in the Middle East, the shifting commitments of the United States in the world, and the rise of the global South, to say a few. And in your view, how do you assess the current global situation with the international order, and in particular the situation in the Indo-Pacific region?
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. We have the post-war, post-1945 order, as well as the post-1991 order, which kind of created a structure of globalization, which went beyond the 1945 order. 1945 globalization was defined by the GATT, General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. Then we had the WTO in 2000, which intensified and deepened globalization. And the Second World War also saw the creation of the United Nations as a key political institution. And then it was reinforced by a range of alliances that the US had built in the Eurasian landmass. Now, all these structures are today undergoing profound change. Paradoxically, this change is not happening on its own. It is happening because the number one power, the United States, which actually led the creation of the post-1945 order, as well as the post-1991 order, is the one which has taken a wrecking ball to the system. Basically, I think what the US is saying, the systems that the US had created for the world, those are no longer useful or effective for the US, and that it needs to change the rules. So what we're seeing is a definitive attempt by the US to change the rules under which we've operated for a long time, whether it is globalization or multilateralism or the question of alliances. And I think the US is, I would say, is getting away with it because American power has grown relative to its peers. I have a different view from the widespread assumption that the US is in decline or that we are entering a multipolar world or even a bipolar world. My sense is the US share of the global GDP has actually increased from 25% to 26%. US GDP at $31 trillion is growing at 2.5%. So in many ways, the US has become stronger than both its allies as well as its enemies. So in a sense, the freedom of action for the US to change these rules has increased. That's one part. Second, on trade, for example, because the whole world depends on exporting to the United States market. The US doesn't depend on exports to the rest of the world. The world depends on exports to the United States. Therefore, the US has used access to its market to impose new tariffs, to rearrange the global trading system. So I think there is I would say, an underestimation of the scale and intensity of the American capacity to change the rules, which is what the US is doing. So my own sense is, over a period of time, I think the US is likely to create a new system in which a new set of rules for globalization, in which China's ability to weaponize interdependence would reduce. The US also wants to redraw the nature of the alliances, both in Europe as well as in Asia. It wants its partners to do more heavy lifting, take more responsibilities for burden sharing, and pick up more slack. That is, US is saying, look, American taxpayer, Americans can't be demanded to pay for the security of Europe and Asia. But if Europe and Asia do more for themselves, the US would still be there as a supporting actor. So in terms of the Indo-Pacific itself, I would say the US actually wants to move away from Europe it always says it wants to move away from Middle East, but it has not. My sense is the conflict between US and China is going to intensify. And one reason why the US is trying to retrench from Europe is to intensify the presence in the first island chain facing China. And I think that's where we're going to see the major fault line will continue, both on the military side, on the geopolitical side, as well as on the economic side. So the lines of confrontation between US and China are going to get more intensified in the Indo-Pacific.
I see. You mentioned post-1945, post-1991 world order. One of the characteristics that did not exist in those days is the rise of the global south. And then definitely China has become a very, very strong presence in the world. And then so is India. And then what is your view on this rise of global south, and how do you see the role of India and the responsibility of India, which is now having the largest population in the world and also the largest democracy in the world?
No, my sense is we have to be somewhat careful about using the word global south. If many people use it as a term to represent the developing countries, the non-Western countries, or sometimes now we use the phrase the global majority, essentially saying outside the developed countries, that these countries are now called the global south. But I think there's a problem that it doesn't really capture the complexity of the situation. For example, Singapore, is it part of the global south? I mean, they say, yeah, they are part of the global south, but they have a per capita income of $100,000. You have Qatar, UAE, these are rich oil-producing countries. Their incomes are super high. They are exporters of capital. So I think it doesn't really capture. What it captures is the general sense of resentment against the West. But the global south, the so-called global south, is very differentiated within itself. There are very rich countries, there are very poor countries. So it's not, it's not like the old G77 non-aligned countries say, look, we're all together to deal with the US. And if you see for example, Trump's initiative on the Board of Peace, many countries of the global south had actually supported Trump, including the Arab and the Muslim states, which said, look, we are fine with it. So this notion that there's a global south waiting to be rallied against the Americans is a myth. That most of the major countries in the global south wants to do direct deals with the Americans, whether it's India, China, or ASEAN. They all want good relations with the US. So I think we got to be, as I said, we got to be careful with this concept. What is happening is there are more actors in the international system today. There you're absolutely right, compared to 1945. China is today one of the second largest economy. It's not just Asian economy, but it's the world's second largest economy. You have other countries are rising, and I would say that is a reality. But that doesn't still, these are not a block, that is, Global South is not a single group, which the non-aligned movement used to say, or the G77 used to say. It's very differentiated. There are multiple interests. There are competing ideas. For example, India does not support the China's Belt and Road Initiative. India-China have a conflict over their border. India doesn't agree with China on what's happening in the Indian Ocean. So this notion that these countries are all have one single view is a myth. I think what's important is I think Japan has rightly taken the view that look, the West, that is mainly US and Europe, have tended to be too condescending towards the developing countries. They tend to intervene in the internal affairs. So I think Japan's PM Kishida, when he talked about Global South in the United States a couple of years ago, he said, look, there must be more respect, more respectful engagement with the non-Western world, and that the West must find a way to work with these countries and not push them into the Chinese camp, but we should be able to develop partnerships with them.
Now let's move on to Japan-India cooperation and the concept of FOIP. Yeah, and the cooperation between Japan and India has steadily expanded across such areas as security or economic security or supply chain resilience and maritime governance. Prime Minister Takaichi visited India, and the countries agreed on strengthening bilateral relations as a partnership of strategic convergence and trust for shared growth, responsibility, and resilience. And in May, Prime Minister Takaichi announced an updated version of Free and Open Indo-Pacific, the FOIP, which places a greater emphasis on inclusiveness, multi-layered engagement, and economic security compared with the original FOIP announced by late Prime Minister Abe. Meanwhile, India has been promoting Mahasabha, mutual and holistic advancement for security and growth across the region, as its cooperation initiative for the Global South and Indo-Pacific. And what are your views on Japan's updated FOIP? Is it possible for updated FOIP and Mahasabha to collaborate? And if so, what can be done in which areas?
I think we are really into a very exciting new phase in India-Japan relationship, which is what was symbolized by Prime Minister Takaichi's visit to India. You know, I think if you go back to the end of the Second World War, India and Japan began very well because Nehru, India's first Prime Minister, did not want Japan to be isolated. He wanted Japan to be integrated into the mainstream after the Second World War. He argued that Japan should not be isolated. So the 50s saw very interesting, positive, shall we say, engagement between India and Japan. But I think as the Cold War became set, I think India and Japan diverged in their paths. India became closer to the Soviet Union. For Japan, it was the US alliance. So the Cold War, the divide became very sharp. But at one level, Japan remained a very important aid giver for India through the Cold War. But I think this began to change after the Cold War, as India began to do economic reforms. Then we saw the Japanese actually move from giving aid to actually investing in India, to invest in Indian production, etc. We had the Suzuki cars being produced in the 80s, and that became a symbol of the new relationship between India and Japan. And then we have actually the visit of Prime Minister Koizumi to India in 2005, and then Prime Minister Abe in 2007, elevated the relationship to a new strategic conception. That is no longer just about economics, that India and Japan have a reason to work together across this Indo-Pacific region, develop the idea of a Quad, or the Quadrilateral Forum for Security, and then work together to produce a more stable maritime Asia. So that was the big idea. And I think that idea went up and down. But my sense is once the FOIP got formed, once Mr. Abe-san returned to power at the end of 2012, I think the two sides started getting very close. India supported the free and open Indo-Pacific. We saw the expansion of the relationship on a steady ground. But I think there were still a number of limitations. The trade had not really picked up. It was there. The ambitions were big, but there was not much actual delivery. And I think that's what has changed. I think with Takaichi's visit, we saw almost over the last 1 year over 120 country agreements on business side. Now we're agreed to work much more closely on defense, produce weapons together, work together to help other countries in the region for security. So I think now we're really getting a big boost, I think, which is the FOIP, updated FOIP that Takaichi-san unveiled in Vietnam earlier this year, provides a new context for reimagining India-Japan relationship and actually taking them up to a higher level. So two factors in this. I think one is the growing assertion of China in Asia. India and Japan both want a more stable, diversified Asia. And second factor is the American uncertainty, the American policies under Trump to have, I think, created conditions where the local countries in Asia, that is Japan, India, Vietnam, all of us have to do much more for our own security, which I think is the principle that Takaichi and Prime Minister Modi have talked about. So we're going to see a lot more engagement between the two sides, more manufacturing, more technology. So I think we're entering a very, very positive phase.
Thank you very much for
you.
giving us a brighter picture for the collaboration.
Thank you for inviting me here.
Thank you.